When we talk about India, it's easy to think of it as just one single society, but really, it's this incredible tapestry woven from three very different but deeply connected worlds: the tribal, the rural, and the urban. So, how do these worlds coexist? How do they shape the India we know today? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive into. So, to really get a grip on modern India, we've got to look at these three worlds, right? What makes them tick? What's daily life actually like in each one? And maybe the biggest question of all, how do they all influence each other? Let's kick off our journey and find out. But before we jump into the India of today, we have to rewind. I mean, way back. Because the social fabric we see now, it's all layered on top of a civilization that is thousands and thousands of years old. We're talking about roots that go all the way back to ancient places like the Harappan civilization. That deep history, well, it's the bedrock for everything that came after. All right, so let's start at the very beginning with the foundational layer, India's indigenous communities. You'll often hear them called Adivasi, a word that literally means original inhabitants. It's a name that recognizes them as the very first people of the land. For so many of these communities, their entire identity is wrapped up in the land they live on. They often reside in more remote areas, deep in forests and hills, in these small settlements called padas. And it's this isolation, in a way, that has helped them preserve these incredibly unique cultures, where life just flows in sync with the natural world around them. Okay, so from a more academic or sociological angle, what exactly makes a community a tribe? This definition here from Andre Bataille really gives us a solid framework. It's about a society that has its own distinct language, its own political boundaries, and crucially, a cultural boundary, a shared way of life that really shapes everything. So let's break that down a bit. What are these core characteristics? Well, for one, their economies are often super simple and tied directly to the land. Think hunting, gathering, that sort of thing. This shared way of life creates a really powerful sense of who they are. And here's something really interesting. Many of these societies are built on egalitarian values. That just means there's much less focus on rigid social hierarchies than you might find elsewhere. But, and this is a big but, life for these communities is definitely not some idyllic paradise. They face some huge challenges, and one of the most critical is losing their ancestral lands. Get this, over 500,000 cases of tribal land being taken away have been registered. Just think about that. When a community loses its land, it's not just property. They lose their livelihood, and that can kick off this devastating cycle of poverty, debt, and poor health. So, to try and tackle these issues, India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, came up with a philosophy known as Panchsheel. The whole idea was to avoid forcing some kind of outside, top-down development model on them. Instead, it was about empowering these communities to develop along their own lines in their own way while protecting their rights to land and forests. The ultimate goal? To judge success by the quality of human life, not just by numbers. Okay, so from the forests and hills, let's now travel to the fields. We're moving into our second world, rural India. This is the agricultural heartland, the very backbone of the nation. And you really can't overstate the sheer scale of rural India. We're talking about almost 70% of the entire country's population living in villages. That's huge. This isn't some small segment of society. It's the day-to-day reality for the vast majority of Indians. And out here, agriculture isn't just a job, it's everything. It's the rhythm of life itself. I think this definition from A.W. Green really nails the essence of village life. It's basically a bunch of people living close together, not just physically but socially, who all share a common way of life. Simple, but it says it all. So what does that social fabric actually look like? Well, think about this. Unlike the anonymity you might find in a huge city, relationships here are what sociologists call primary. That means they're personal, they're informal, they're face-to-face. You know your neighbors know you. Family is absolutely the cornerstone of everything, and tradition, including the historical influence of the caste system, still plays a really big role in daily life. But just like with tribal communities, this way of life is under enormous pressure. Widespread poverty and illiteracy are major issues, and for many, economic distress is just a constant reality. And a lot of that distress comes in the form of absolutely crushing debt, which has led to one of the most tragic and heartbreaking social problems in modern India. Yeah, this image really says it all. It's a stark symbol of the agrarian crisis. When the rains don't come, or the crops fail, and those loans just can't be repaid, the burden, both financial and psychological, it just becomes unbearable for so many farmers.
This isn't just some abstract economic problem, it's a deep, deep social wound that affects countless families.
All right, from the village, let's now make our way to the big city, the metropolis. Welcome to the third world of India, the fast-paced, bustling urban centers that are the engines of its modern economy and culture.
You know, cities are like magnets for ambition, aren't they? They pull people in from all over with the promise of jobs, better education, and just opportunity. They're the hubs of industry and services, and what defines them is that high population density and an amazing, sometimes chaotic mix of all kinds of different people living right on top of each other.
Sociologist Louis Wirth really hit the nail on the head with this definition. The key phrase to focus on is socially heterogeneous individuals. That's a fancy way of saying a whole bunch of different people, from different classes, castes, religions, and regions, all living together. And that mix, well, it creates a really dynamic and sometimes pretty tense social environment. And the social vibe of a city is a completely different universe from the village. Remember those personal, face-to-face primary relationships? Well, in the city, interactions are usually secondary. They're more impersonal, more transactional. You might interact with dozens of people a day, the bus driver, the shopkeeper, your coworkers, but you don't necessarily know them. Life here is also about a complex division of labor, a strong sense of individualism, and, you'll see this everywhere, massive extremes between the rich and the poor.
So, looking at this, you can see the two worlds in stark contrast, right? Rural life is all about community, tradition, and those personal bonds. Urban life, on the other hand, is driven by diversity, industry, and individualism. They're really two fundamentally different ways to experience life in India. But of course, all this explosive urban growth comes with a major dark side. So many of India's cities are just buckling under the pressure. We're talking about massive overcrowding, which leads to housing shortages and the spread of slums. And the basic infrastructure, transportation, clean water, sewerage systems, it's all stretched to its absolute breaking point. Okay, so we've looked at these three very different worlds, tribal, rural, and urban. But the big question is, how separate are they really? And the truth is, not very. They aren't isolated islands. It's much better to think of them as points on a continuum, constantly interacting, overlapping, and shaping each other. And you can actually see this in government policy. There are different strategies for each segment. You have constitutional protections specifically for tribal communities. You've got massive rural employment programs like MGNREGS. And then you have these big urban renewal projects like the Smart Cities Mission. It's all an attempt to manage the unique challenges and needs of each part of this incredibly complex social fabric. And this quote really sums it all up. These three worlds are in a constant conversation with each other. Think about it. Cities depend on rural areas for their food, right? But at the same time, rural life is being totally transformed by urban trends, technology, and media. This constant back and forth, that is the real engine of social change in India. Which brings us to one last big question. Because in our world today, with so much migration and technology connecting everyone, the lines between these three worlds are getting blurrier and blurrier every single day. So what does it even mean to be Indian today, in a nation where these once distinct societies are constantly colliding, blending, and forging something entirely new?